All right. Hi, I'm Megan. I'm going to be your instructor today, and I'm here at Cheehaw Park and Zoo in Albany, Georgia. And today we're going to be talking about habitat. Um, we can make different habitats and different habitat fragmentations. So let me share my screen. All right, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right. I'm glad I got this working. All right, so we're going to be talking about making animal habitats today. And so, what is a habitat? So, a habitat is going to be the natural home or the environment of an animal, plant, or other organism. And so, like, my habitat would be my house, and your habitat would be your house, right? So, animals, depending on what kind of animal they are, live in different areas. So, like sharks, they live in the ocean. So, that's their natural home and environment is the ocean. And deer, they live in the forest. And so, that's where they would normally be found is in the forest with lots of trees and room to run around. And then in the desert, you'll find cactus because they're specially adapted to not having the rain and lots of water. So they are adapted to where they can just like hold all the water inside of them and not have to worry about going long periods without water. And then grasslands, you'll have animals like zebras because there's lots of grass for them to graze and run around. And the stripe pattern helps protect them from other predators in that habitat environment. So all the animals are adapted to their specific environment, kind of like how we're adapted to our own house. And if we go to someone else's house, we feel a little uneasy because it's not ours, it's someone else's. So if you remove an animal from their habitat, they don't feel as comfortable either. So one of the big problems we have is habitat fragmentation, and that is a process where large and continuous habitat gets divided into smaller areas, and a lot of those areas become isolated. And this can be caused naturally or from humans. And so some of the natural ones are volcanoes, because when a volcano erupts and the lava goes everywhere, it just wipes out everything, right? And it's like a clean slate. And then you have wildfires. And here in Georgia, we do a lot of prescribed fires as well to help with this because it will get rid of a lot of the leaf litter and open up that seed bed to let more plants grow. And some plants, they need to have fire, otherwise, they're unable to have seeds and grow. And that would be really bad for the plant if it's not able to have regeneration where there's more of it introduced into our environment, and that plant might become extinct if we forget to put fire on the landscape. But it also happens naturally from lightning strikes. And so Mother Nature has adapted where these events where volcanoes or wildfires happen, Mother Nature has adapted those animals. So like the gopher tortoise, it's adapted to having fire on the landscape a lot. And so in the longleaf pine ecosystem where the gopher tortoise is found, they get fire every 2 to 3 years. Sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter. It just depends. But when we put prescribed fire in there, we try to do it every 2 to 3 years. And so that fire will go through the landscape, and the gopher tortoise digs the burrows deep and long underground. And so the gopher tortoise is able to go in its burrow and be safe from the fire and not affected. And then we have climate change, which is affecting it. So polar bears, they live in the icy Antarctic, right? So with climate change and it getting warmer, there's less ice available. And some of its prey species also need to have that colder climate for it to live because it's adapted and has all that blubber to keep it nice and warm, right? Well, if you're wearing your winter coat in the summer, you get too hot, right? I know I would get too hot in the summer if I wore my winter coat. So if they're living in this cold environment and they're wearing their winter coats, it's not very good and healthy for them. So that can decrease some animal species in colder climates. And then agriculture is a big human cause because we will convert a lot of forest and grasslands to agriculture fields. That way, we're able to supply us on a large scale with food. And the same thing with urbanization. A lot of people have neighborhoods or cities built in these areas that used to be natural communities, like forests, like Atlanta used to have a lot of forest area. And so, ooh, let's close that. All right. And so the urbanization um, can take away from our natural communities because it's destroying. Um, to put a house up, you have to take away all the plants and trees. And sometimes, if it's on a hill, you cut it out and make it flat. That way, you have a level foundation. And those areas that were moving and changing were home to animals and also some plants. And plants, they can't just move around like animals can, right? They have roots, so they're kind of stuck. So it's harder for plants when you start fragmenting their habitat. And then, did you know aquatic animals are affected by this as well? So a hydroelectric reservoir, it's where you see those dams and they have water going through it and we get hydroelectricity. It's one of our renewable resources and we get a lot of electricity from that and they're great. But fish like to swim up and downstream, especially during spawning, so that they can lay more eggs and have more babies. And some fish are unable to go past these dams because they're too tall or the outflow is too strong that the fish can't swim up past it and get through it. So the fish are unable to get past that and get to where they would normally spawn and lay their eggs and have their babies. And so this is just a picture or a diagram of what habitat fragmentation can come from. So over here we have like a whole area of tigers where they can like freely go back and forth. But then when you add in factories and urbanization, it splits an area into two. And so we have zone A and zone B. Well, the tigers in zone A, they can't get to the tigers in zone B anymore. So now they're unable to interact with each other. And that can affect the populations because when animals breed, they get different genetics because they're not breeding with their brothers and sisters. And so they get different genetics to have different adaptations because over time when you breed together you're able to have stronger adaptations to living in your environment, which makes it easier for you to live and survive. So if you're not mixing the genetics, there's less variation in there. And if it goes on for long enough, the variation is so little that it can have a negative impact on these animals by giving them weird mutations that cause them to be less able to survive on their own. And sometimes one of the adaptations is having two heads. So you don't see a lot of animals with two heads survive very long in nature, right? You pretty much only see those in zoos. That's because it's harder to survive in the wild that way. And so that can be one of the negative mutations that occur when you um, or when you fragment that population and have smaller and smaller gene pools to pull from when you're having your babies. And sometimes this can also lead to them becoming two genetically different species or subspecies altogether. So if it goes on for long enough, those species now adapt a little bit differently. And their genes, when you look at them in a lab, will say, oh, hey, I'm no longer exactly the same animal as this one is. So it's different subspecies at that point, which is really cool. So some of the effects of habitat fragmentation is that you can have unfragmented habitats that have a declining population. They're easier to rescue because of immigration. And immigration is where new animals move into that area. So if you have one big continuous area, it's easier for more animals to interact, right? Like we were talking about that on the previous slide with the tigers. So if they're declining and more animals move in, they're able to bring in those new genes and have better babies that will be able to survive better, which increases their population size. So that's a lot easier in these areas that haven't been affected by humans or natural disasters. Now, in fragmented habitats, it's a lot harder to rescue them, and it's because of a distance or barrier. So if it's a really big distance, some animals can't travel that way or that far because they're too small or their home range is already in a different area, or there's a barrier. Like if you've built a really big interstate, right? Like in this picture, we have all these interstates. That's going to be hard for animals to travel across. And it'd be really dangerous because they might get hit by a car. And then it's also dangerous for the people driving because if they hit an animal, it can hurt them and cause them to wreck and get injured as well. So there's not really a positive to either sides because the animals are losing and so are the people. And some of the animals that can be affected are gulf sturgeon, polar bears, and we also have plants such as wiregrass. And so it can be both aquatic and terrestrial. So animals in the water, it can be freshwater, saltwater, it doesn't matter. There's animals in both that are affected by this. And then we have all sorts of animals all over, from itty bitty tiny bugs to big animals like a polar bear, because they're huge, right? And then we have plants that are affected by this as well, because plants, they're not able to get up and walk around like the animals are, right? And so the Gulf sturgeon here, what he does is he's anadromous, which means he will move from salt water to fresh water. And we were talking about the hydroelectric dams, right? So he's one of the fish who can't get past those dams. So here in Albany, we have the Flint River. Well, we used to have the Gulf sturgeon found here naturally because they would migrate up the river. Well, people have built dams in there for the power to help produce electricity for like our houses and businesses and everything. And so because of those dams, um, the sturgeon is no longer able to get, I don't know what's happening. Mm, nope. Okay, so because of the dams, I'm sorry about that. Because of the dams, the Gulf sturgeon is no longer able to move very far up the Flint River. So we no longer have them in the Flint River here in Albany because we have dams further down and the sturgeon are unable to get past that. And then here we have a polar bear, and what's affecting their habitat right now is climate change is a big part of that because they like to live in snowy, icy areas and they have all that blubber on them and like fat to keep them nice and warm, right? It's like wearing our winter coat, remember? Well, with climate change and it getting warmer, it's a lot harder for them to find ice to hunt from because they like to stand on the ice before going after their prey. And so the polar bear is losing areas where it can hunt from. It's getting overheated. You know, when you're outside playing in the summer and it gets really, really hot and you just need to cool down? Well, it's a lot harder for the polar bear too because it doesn't have air conditioning. He lives outside. And with his winter coat on, he can't escape that. And so he gets sick from being over hot and can die from that. There's less prey available because a lot of his prey needs the cold water as well. And so he can also starve, and that's not good. And it can also make him really sick because he's not at the temperature he is adapted for and is used to living in, and he's not getting the amount of food or the proper nutrients that he needs, because we all need nutrients to survive, right? And one of our plants that we're going to talk about is wiregrass. And so that is a plant that is evolved to needing fire, but not just any fire. It needs fire in the early growing season. So from about April to June is when the wiregrass needs to have fire. That way it can have viable or usable seeds. Now, if you burn a longleaf pine ecosystem that has wiregrass in the understory or on the ground, you can burn it any time of year, but the wiregrass may not have seed that is any good for growing more wiregrass. And because it's a little grass, the seeds don't go very far away when they disperse and spread out. So the seeds stay pretty close to it. So it's really important to have the viable seed. And this plant is also adapted to being burned every 2 to 3 years, kind of like our longleaf pine trees are. And it needs that early growing season from April to June to have that viable and usable seed. That way it can continue to have more and more seeds and more plants. And another thing that affects the wiregrass is agriculture. So a lot of these pine stands that we see today here in South Georgia used to be a natural longleaf wiregrass ecosystem. But when you put agriculture in there and convert it to ag, you get rid of all those roots and everything. And then when it goes back to forest, it the wiregrass is not able to reestablish. So people have to come in and plant wiregrass, kind of like how you would plant a tree, but you're planting grass instead, because the agriculture disrupted their root system, and it's not a very good seeder, and the seed doesn't spread very far. It needs to be planted, and so you can buy wiregrass plugs at the store and dig a hole and plant those under your longleaf pines. And so here I have a video. And this is going to be of one of our Gulf sturgeon at the Flint River Aquarium. So these are our Gulf sturgeon up here, and they are in a freshwater tank. And they're the ones that I said used to be found up here in Albany in the Flint River, but because of people building dams, they're no longer able to travel up the river that far because they get stopped. And let's see, exit. Okay. And so we have some solutions to be able to fix some of what we have done as humans to cause habitat fragmentation and just altering it. And so we can protect existing high quality green space. So if you see a really good piece of forest, we can protect that. That way it's always there and the animals will always have a home. So our wildlife management areas, they're a really good example of that. Because they are thousands and thousands of acres. They are huge areas, and they don't have a lot of human interference, where we don't build really big roads on them. There's like little dirt roads so you can get around to different areas. And a lot of our wildlife biologists do a lot of studies on there. So they're able to see how all the different species of plants and animals interact with each other and help each other out. And they're able to give us more information on how to better protect these areas and these species in the future. And then you can also manage and improve degraded green space. And degraded is where it has been disrupted or destroyed a little bit and just needs a little bit of help. So by managing areas, a good example would be feral hogs. So feral hogs are not native and they like to root around in the dirt and dig up plants and eat them. And they're a really big problem because they breed really, really fast. And so by removing some of these feral hogs, we're reducing their negative impact to these ecosystems because they're not found here naturally. And so by removing them, these plants have a better chance at survival and being able to reproduce and have more plants in that area. And then you can restore sites of particular value, and a good example is wetlands. So a lot of people will build houses and businesses on a salt marsh. But salt marshes are really important because when a hurricane comes through, they take a lot of that impact and a lot of that storm surge and just absorb it. That way it doesn't come flooding very far into the mainland. And so our wetlands are really, really important for that. And so a lot of people and organizations are trying to get into restoring these wetland habitats like swamps and marshes and making them better and healthier ecosystems because we have some animals like the diamondback terrapin. It's the only turtle found exclusively in the salt marsh, which is really, really cool. And so by protecting these areas and getting them better, we're protecting our mainland that we live on, as well as other habitats that our terrestrial or land-going animals live in as well. And then we can improve the use of land between these sites. So the sides of roads, you're driving down the road and you see like a little grassy area to the side, and then there's a lot of forest area. By improving those little grassy areas, by adding more wildflowers or different types of grasses, that way we have a wide variety of seeds for like songbirds and insects and everything. By adding that in there instead of just a monoculture where it's just like one thing, right? And that's not always the best, is it? Like we need a wide variety of nutrients. So animals need that too. So by having and introducing more flowers and different types of grasses, it improves the use of that little grassy area between the forested areas. And then we can also create new green space by taking old lots that used to be a house that like burned down. This is just an example. So you take the land that old house used to be on and you just start planting the trees and grasses and flowers and shrubs that you would naturally find there. Once you get the plants established, the animals will naturally come there because they're attracted to that. So Mother Nature will be like, hey, I found there's this new land that humans helped. Now we can have animals go there. And so nature will help heal itself. We just need to help start the process. And so a big solution that we have found in other countries, I don't know of any in the United States yet. And this is a little bridge going over a really busy highway for animals to use. And it's a lot safer than animals crossing the highway here because you see a lot of roadkill, right? I know I saw a lot this morning on my way in. And so that's really dangerous for both the animals crossing and the people driving their cars. And so by building these bridges, animals are able to go back and forth a lot easier. And the people don't have to worry about as many accidents hitting the animals, and the animals are able to safely cross over. So we are now easily connecting these two different locations, so the populations are able to interact easier, like how we have that tiger diagram, where it's like one big continuous. This is a way at helping to create a more continuous population, which is a really cool thing that we're doing. All right, and so I'm going to stop sharing. All right, and are you ready to meet some of our friends that I brought in today?
Yes.
All right. So this is Blue Jean. He's a blue tongue skink. Do you see his tongue? All nice and blue there. So he's from Australia. And in Australia, he's affected, um, or his habitat fragmentation comes from urbanization and building neighborhoods and suburbs. And in Australia, they're really good about like keeping their yards really natural and having that diversity of plants to help support the wildlife. But what do a lot of people own as pets?
Pet birds.
Yeah, they do have pet birds, but they have a lot of dogs. And so if a dog finds this in the yard, the dogs will eat them. And so that's not very good for the population in Australia. And in Australia, these guys are listed as threatened. And so you can see how big he is, right? And a cool thing about him is, what do you think his blue tongue is for? So his blue tongue is that color to help with him, because other animals will eat him as prey. So the predators will think he's poisonous, even though he's not. He's perfectly safe. It just makes him look poisonous. Because you have you heard of the poison dart frogs? They're the bright, bright colors. Well, he has that bright blue tongue to make the predators think that he's poisonous, just like them. And if you think something's poisonous, you're not going to eat it because you don't want to get sick, right? And then another thing that affects these guys is that they're in the pet trade. And so, depending on where you get your animal, some bad people will just take them from the wild, which also affects their populations in the wild instead of just breeding them in captivity. So that's another problem these guys are facing. Do you have any questions about Blue Jean here? All right, I'll put him up and I'll get our next one. So this is David. He is an Eastern Indigo. Are you able to see him? Can you see
Yes.
how big he is? So he lives in the longleaf wiregrass ecosystem, and he is one of the animals that will utilize a gopher tortoise burrow. Oh, he's moving. He's really active today. And so, um, he is affected from habitat fragmentation because the longleaf wiregrass ecosystem used to cover a lot of Georgia, but because of agriculture, it has been converted to fields. And we talked about how the wiregrass can't reestablish very easily on its own and it needs human help. Well, he likes to live in that ecosystem. And if we turn all of it into ag field and he uses the gopher tortoise burrows and there's no more gopher tortoises, he's going to struggle as well, right? And with having the pine forest, we have a lot of different plants in the understory, and you can see how pretty and shiny he is. But all the plants in the understory will allow for a wide diversity of seeds for different mice and rodents. And that's one of the things that this guy eats is different mice and rodents. And he will also eat snakes, and he'll eat rattlesnakes, which are also found in these ecosystems. So it's just like a whole food web and different interactions of animals within this ecosystem, which is really cool and really important for everyone to live and be happy and healthy. And you know how most snakes like to give a big hug to their prey and hug it until it's no longer moving and then they swallow it whole? So this guy is really cool. He doesn't do that. And he's non-venomous. So what do you think he does? So what he does is he'll bite his prey item and just sling it around like this, hitting it on different objects. And that's how he kills his prey. So it's a very unique way compared to other snakes. Other snakes will either use their venom if they're poisonous, or will give it a really big hug and squeeze it. But he chooses a different method. Do you have any questions about him?
Yes.
All right.
How do you know a poisonous snake from a not poisonous snake?
Okay, so in Georgia, we have we have 3 different rattlesnakes and a coral snake. So the rattlesnake is really easy because it has the rattle on the end of the tail that goes shh. And then our coral snake and this little saying only works in in the southeast. It will not work anywhere else. And it's the red on black, okay Jack, red on yellow, kill a fellow. I don't know if you've heard that before, but another good thing to tell is, and this is not always right, some of their pupils their pupils will go up and down if they are venomous and side to side if they are non-venomous. And then you can also look at the head shape and you see how this guy, his head shape is more rounded and not as triangular. That's a good indicator. And one thing that this guy does is he can flatten out his neck, kind of like a cobra. You've seen the cobras with the wide neck. He can flatten it out and he can hiss to make him sound like he's venomous. And that's to help keep prey from, or help to keep predators from messing with him. Do you have any other questions?
No.
All right, let me put this guy up real quick. All right, I hope you liked our animals. So that was our little talk on making habitat and how we affect habitat fragmentation and how we are working towards helping with that and mitigating that. And I thought our wildlife bridges were really cool and a really unique solution to that. So any more questions? All right, well, I hope you have a great day.
Bye.
All right, bye.